Good evening and welcome to Bull Moose in Scarborough, Maine. This is Maine Book Club's first live event. It's an experiment of sorts, and we're here tonight with Phil Baker, who is the author of Hunger Hill. Of course, tonight's program is also being streamed, as always, on Facebook and YouTube. Those of you out there, welcome. I'm your host, Bill Nemitz, and we're going to talk to Phil about his book, Hunger Hill, but first I want to thank a number of folks out there who have already submitted questions for tonight's discussion. We have a lot to talk about, a very fascinating and interesting book. I also want to thank Bull Moose and Coffee by Design for their sponsorship of this series of book club events. Without them, these events just wouldn't be possible. And also to the many booksellers across Maine where many of you scored your copies of Hunger Hill. So, without further ado, Phil, welcome.
Thank you.
I have to tell you, I told you just before we went on that I finished this book this morning. You know, no time like the present. And,
Absolutely.
And I was absolutely riveted. We spoke yesterday. I had about 40 pages to go. I knew something big was about to happen, and it did. So we will get to that because this book builds and builds and builds to that ultimate climax. But first, I just wanted our audience to learn a little bit about you. This is your first novel.
Yes. It's my first published.
First published novel.
Yes.
Okay. You've led a rather eclectic life before that. It's not somebody who's been sitting at the keyboard all the time. Tell us, give us a thumbnail of how you came to be a novelist.
I've wanted to write since I was a kid, and a big reader. My family reads, and I dreamed of writing a novel. Dreams led to goals, which are associated with the things you have to do, and so I did my career, which I'm closing in on the end of, and the dream of writing a novel was still there. 13 years ago, I told my mother that I was going to write a novel, and that made it real. When you tell your mom you're going to do something, you better do it. And she's holding me to it.
Now, if I recall in the acknowledgments, was it your mother was the reader and your father was the writer, or the other way around?
They both were readers, and my father told a great story. He was one of the great storytellers.
Okay.
Yeah, and my mother just read a lot and read good stuff, and taught us children to also be readers.
What was her reaction when you told her you were going to write a novel? What did she tell you?
She kind of reacted with finally, sort of reaction. So she was very happy.
Now, did you have the idea for the novel at that point, or did it come after?
This was the first novel I wrote.
I see.
And did not publish. But the idea for this novel came a few years ago. There was a luxury yacht of an unreasonable size. It was huge.
I remember it. Yep.
And it was so big that it couldn't dock Little Diamond and the East End.
Out near Fort Gorgeous.
North of Fort Gorgeous. It was owned by a Russian oligarch, and the writer brain was turned on and said, that can't be good. So we explored that, me and my brain.
Did you sneak around it? Did you go out on a boat? Or did you just watch it from afar?
I didn't get a chance like some of my characters do.
Yeah, I was going to say, you do that at your own risk, right? Right. But that was the seed.
So that was the seed, and that's where Hunger Hill started.
Amazing. Yeah. And of course, Hunger Hill being Munjoy Hill.
Referring to Munjoy Hill,
which was the stage for the story.
Which is the stage, and I fictionalized because the Munjoy Hill of today is a rather shishi address. The Munjoy Hill of my book and of when I lived there many years ago was a grittier place. My book is set in current times, but it's set in the gritty
Right.
Munjoy Hill.
Yeah, the condos haven't arrived,
No.
the tear downs and the buildups, that hasn't
right.
happened yet.
All
It's
the cubes, the glass cubes haven't arrived
and
yet.
it's still a very, very tight-knit community, a
Yes.
world unto itself.
Yes,
up
it
there.
definitely is. Yeah, yeah. It's a storied neighborhood in reality.
Yeah, when I saw the cover of the book, I thought, wait a minute.
Right.
I know that store. The reason I know that store is our son used to manage that store.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh.
So I said, that's the market.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
I mean, it's a perfect rendering of
Yeah.
the whole street. Which brings me to the other thing that impressed me about this book. And you know, I'm a guy. I worked in Portland for 40 plus years, walking many of these streets and all that. The accuracy with which you describe Portland was just astounding. I mean, I almost feel like before you finished a scene, you went out and clocked it on your odometer. That, you know, how important was that to you to get the sense of place down?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because sense of place is important to me in my life. I grew up in Falmouth. My parents had a 14-acre lot right on the mouth of the Pasumsket River. And that gave me, as a child, something that I always appreciated, which was a very strong sense of place. I always knew where I was from. And so I wanted my book, it was important to me for my book to come from a place and have a sense of place. So I'm happy that you did find that to be true.
Yeah, in Portland itself, I mean, the waterfront, the bricks, the police station.
Yeah.
At one point, you had, I think it was Detective Keene, pulled out of the garage at the bricks, headed out onto Franklin, and headed north toward the interstate. And I felt like I was in the car.
Yeah, right.
I know. Here come the lights. Watch out for the red light.
Right.
You know, so it was right down to the most minute details. It was really. It was amazing. Let me.
Can I input
Sure,
something
go ahead.
here? I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
but I just wanted to shout out to my niece, Elise Bolduc, for doing the oils that
Oh,
comprise
good, okay.
the front and back of
How did
the-
that? Did she do it knowing it was for the book cover, or?
Yes, she asked that, if she could be a part of the project. Yeah,
And really, this is the store
that's the story.
around which the whole story
Yeah,
rotates.
DeLucas, yeah.
Yeah,
It
because
sure is.
the place that everybody seemed to want.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, we got a ton of questions from our audience. I'm going to intersperse some
Okay,
of those
yeah,
here
right.
now, too. One of our audience members asked, why set the novel in Maine? Would this story, this goes to what we were just talking about, would this story have worked elsewhere?
It would have worked as a piece of fiction, yes, I'm sure, but it wouldn't work as a piece of my fiction.
Write what you know,
Yeah,
you know,
Yeah.
something you're familiar with.
right.
Yeah,
right.
because the underlying strategy that the Russians use in this, if I recall, is it's really taking place up and down the East Coast. I mean, they're doing this kind of thing in a
Right.
lot of towns.
Right.
But Portland kind of stands out as a place, well, that you were familiar with.
Right,
you know.
that I was familiar with. It could have been, you know, East Coast, definitely, but any place with a significant tourist, or is a significant tourist attraction, because the harvesting of the cash required.
Right. Yeah, I wonder if it had been set in Old Orchard Beach. Can you imagine what?
Oh, there was.
There's an Old
yeah.
Orchard Beach scene, but,
Oh, yeah.
but what a whole different story it would have
Yeah.
been, you know,
Right,
without a
right.
doubt. Someone else asked, are the characters in this book pulled from pieces of anyone in your own life or people you ran across? I wondered the same thing because you had such a kind of an intimate relationship as the author with a lot of these characters that I wondered if they were based on, you know, various people in
This
your life.
one and
Yeah.
that one,
Yeah.
a little bit of this one.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a little bit of this and a little bit of him and a little bit of her, but I don't focus on that, so I just create a character from whole cloth, and but I do become intimate with the
Yeah,
character
yeah.
typically.
Well, I'm gonna jump to a question I was going to save for later, but seems the good time. Who's your favorite character in this book?
Well, I think probably the favorite character of a lot of people is Eileen.
Eileen.
And I like Eileen a lot because she comes out of the woodwork to sit down with me to write her. In fact, she does a lot of the writing. She's amazing to write. And I just sit back and watch her. I give her all the good lines, too. She gets good lines.
Does she say "for cripe's sake" at the end of every at the end of every sentence?
Every sentence. Yeah.
That's the part I loved. But she was kind of powerful beyond her size, beyond her years. If ever there was a true survivor,
Yeah.
it was Eileen.
Yeah.
And there are times late in the book where I'm thinking, oh no, like when she's trying to go from one stateroom to another, I'm thinking, don't fall in the ocean,
Yeah.
please, don't do this to me. You know,
Right.
and
I'm not
thank
that. I'm not that mean.
yeah. Let's talk about the police in this because, again, much like Portland, and I've as a journalist I dealt with a lot of police over the years, and you really I remember thinking some might think that the way they're talking here is cop show cliche, except for the fact that this is how they really talk. This is, if you hang out with cops, this is what you hear. How did you don't have law enforcement background yourself.
Correct.
You never worked.
I don't.
You weren't a reserve officer down at Old Orchard Beach.
Right.
But you got that. You tapped into it. How did you do that? Did you befriend law enforcement officers?
I do know several law enforcement officers, and they helped me. The language, though, it is cliche, and it is real at the same time.
Right.
So you're going to hear it and read it in much popular literature and entertainment. What I was able to get from some of the law enforcement officers I know is some of the psychology, some of the depth of feeling that I was able to bring across, particularly in Keene,
Right.
because of his
backstory.
the backstory.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. It's because you raised some really profound issues, especially for police officers, with him. As we know, he is coming to this murder investigation fairly fresh off a fatal shooting. He shot someone. There was a lot of hubbub about it at the time, and he was ultimately cleared, but the shadow follows him. What struck me about that was it's at one point you dive fairly deeply into this community of officers, and geographically it's a broad community because they're all over the country, but these are officers, police officers, who have in the line of duty killed someone, and that sets them apart. In this case, it was the so-called East End sniper, is
Right,
that right?
right.
And
Eastern Prom
Eastern Prom
EPS,
sniper, that's
yeah.
right. And it was they finally found, the question was the guy armed or not, and they found the gun in his van finally.
Right.
But it put Keene into that community. Why did you go so deeply into that? Were you trying to make a point that, on behalf of policemen who find themselves in there?
I don't think I was trying to make a point. A point may have come across. I needed Keene to have baggage. I needed him to have baggage. I chose that kind of baggage because it set him at odds with the community and with the press.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah, no offense.
Don't you worry, I'm ready.
That darn Bill Nemitz, that darn Bill.
I'm saying that Darfield Baker.
So There had to be something, and that seemed like strong fodder for setting Keene and these other entities at odds.
And the city councils,
City
his
council.
career's on the line.
Yeah.
All these things
Yeah.
play into it. So
Yes.
it's with him all the time,
It is,
24/7.
as you can imagine it would be.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he makes it very clear that taking a life, justified or not,
Right,
changes a person,
exactly.
and it puts you into that group.
He
you're in law
thinks of himself as an executioner
Yeah, right.
and a brute.
Yeah. So, Leo,
Uh-oh.
Leo Venti, the reporter for the Portland Press Herald.
Yeah, as a
No
matter of
less.
fact, yeah.
And my eyes are bugging out. I'm saying, okay, maybe Leo is this guy. No, he's this. No, he's this guy. Over the years, cop reporters, and cop reporters are much like policemen themselves, police officers themselves. They're a breed apart.
Yes.
But Leo.
Not that I know any.
Yeah. Do you?
I don't
Oh, you
actually,
don't really?
other
No.
than you. No.
Leo is the community, really. In many ways.
Yeah.
He's the one that's always knocking on the door and being a pain. But did you? So you didn't base him on anyone. What were your criteria for the reporter? He had to be somewhat obnoxious, right?
Very obnoxious. One reviewer called him smarmy.
Smarmy.
Yeah, which was a word
Yeah,
I liked.
yeah.
But that's a hard question to answer because I did not create any of my characters with a list of requirements.
They just evolve more.
They do. They do. They start out. They might start with a name. They might start with their purpose in the book, but they evolve. And if they become smarmy, well.
Well, the part that really got me about Leo, where it's an adversarial relationship throughout most of the narrative. I mean, because of what happened, and what happened, as we know, is he printed a comment that Detective Keene made about the race of the guy he shot.
Right.
And it was something to the effect that just because he was black doesn't mean he wasn't innocent. Did I get that right?
Just because he was black doesn't mean he was innocent.
He was innocent. And and that touched off a firestorm, obviously. And Leo, you touched on a very sensitive nerve when it comes to the relationship between the media and the police, and that is what's on and off the record. Now, I got the impression that Keene, when he made that comment to Leo, this was background banter to him. And Leo wrote it down in his note and thought of it as an on-the-record quote.
Right.
And Leo's defense later on is, hey, we did not specify, which is frankly the rule I always went by. That if someone wants to go off the record, they ask first, and you don't proceed. If you say yes, then you proceed. If you don't say yes, then you're still on the record. So there's all these kind of a maze of rules to follow there.
Unwritten.
Unwritten rules,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And 90%, 95% of the time, comments like that Keene made, frankly, stay off the record. If you want to maintain your relationships with your source,
Right.
which Leo apparently doesn't care much about.
Right.
But I spent a lot of time kind of putting down the book and looking back on situations that I've experienced myself, and what a slippery slope that is, and how it can get everybody into trouble. The other thing about Leo that struck me is when he finally comes around, when Keene starts sharing information with him because it's useful to the investigation, Leo becomes kind of a co-conspirator with the police, where he puts the story in the paper about basically updating people on where the whole thing is at, so that the Russians out there will consume that information and make a move.
Right.
Do you like Leo? Because in the end, he helped.
Right, right. I wanted him to reconcile with the police, not necessarily Keene, but the police department, because it is his beat.
Get back on his feet.
And he wants to get back.
Yeah.
He realizes he's made a mistake and wants to get back in the good graces. But he also, Keene at one point says, "I don't mean to write your story for you." And,
Right.
and
Which is
Leo
exactly
says,
what he
"Yes,
said.
you do. That's exactly what you wanted."
But here's what I want you to say.
Right, right.
Right.
Did that happen?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All the time. Are you
Yeah.
kidding? You know, and I just, you know, you just ignore it.
Yeah.
You know, basically.
Yeah.
But sometimes when you're quoting people, they are writing your story for you. So it works that way too. It works both ways.
Right.
Let's talk about Silk for a minute. This was a great question we got from an audience member. Was it your intention that the reader come to like Silk? Because I did. This was the reader talking.
Yeah. I very much wanted to make her a sympathetic villain. It's hard to do.
Right. When she's shooting people in the head.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
right,
You know,
yeah.
hey.
But they're all bad guys.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you know, there are good points to everybody and bad points. But yeah, so yes and no. I wanted to make her a sympathetic character who a reader could decide that he or she liked.
But ruthless.
But ruthless.
Absolutely
Yeah.
ruthless. I was driving here tonight and I was kind of reflecting on the book and I thought, well, let's see, let's project this forward. What happens to Silk? Well, we know what happens right away. She gets taken into federal custody. She's got all those murders hanging over her head, and if those don't work out, she's got the, I guess it's the DeLuca murder
Yeah.
waiting for her back in Portland.
Right.
So one way or another, Silk's going to spend a lot of time behind bars.
Right.
But I was thinking, maybe down the road, you could have Silk emerge from prison, you know, and see where, because she has so much. She's a very smart woman. She has great instincts, and you know, who knows what would become of her? She'll probably become a prison inmate kingpin, I would think.
Very possible.
You know, the way she operates.
Very possible. There is fodder there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get to that too. One reader wanted to know, were there any scenes that you didn't that didn't make the cut, that didn't make the book because you felt like, you know, we're going off track, or maybe that's too graphic? Because parts of this get a little bit graphic, particularly on the boat and on the yacht in the climax. Were there things you put in and then took out?
Well, there's always backstory, and I write quite a bit of backstory. So there are stories that are necessary for me to be familiar with to continue the narrative that don't make the narrative.
Right.
So yes, there are. Now, I didn't write anything that I thought was too graphic or for one reason or another that I felt didn't make the cut. They were intentionally left out. We're never going to make the cut.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your writing process. This book, and this is why you novelists, I don't know how you do it. I mean, covering the news is, you know, you tell the story. You tell people what happened because that's what happened.
Right.
But when you're writing a novel, none of it happened. You have to make it up. And this is a very complex story. But first, let's back up, and one audience member want to know, what's your writing process? Did you have a set time every day that you sat down to write, or did you wake up in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock and inspired and start pounding away? How did you do it?
Well, for the 3 o'clock in the morning inspiration, I don't have a notebook next to the bed, but every now and then I'll jump out of bed and type it down, get it onto the computer, and every time, without fail, when you get up in the morning and you go back to look at it, it's garbage. It's rubbish.
But the dream was good.
Oh, it was fantastic. It got me out of bed.
That's right.
I write early in the morning. That's my time. I don't write. I don't do the 500 words a day, 1,000 words a day. I write when I have the time, and I will find myself writing on a Saturday morning from 6 until 3 in the afternoon, suddenly realizing I haven't had anything to eat. Or I'll write and think, I wonder if the bird feeder is full, and I'll go fill the bird feeder. I'll come back and I'll write, and I'll think, I wonder if something needs to be put back in the shed, or what. Something comes to mind to keep me from writing. So these things happen. But I just
sometimes could that be your brain just saying, I need a break?
Yeah, it is.
I need a rest. I need some oxygen.
Yeah,
because you do get lost in the story sometimes.
And there are other times when I can't work. People call it writer's block, whatever it may be. I can't move forward in the story. And I've heard, and it works, that doing some research will help that. And the internet is key in that, because it's right there for me to do some research. And it gets you go. It can get you going down wormholes that you don't want to.
This whole racketeering, I assume, was based on a lot of research on your part, with the federal investigation and the money laundering and the
parallel
economy, as the agent put it.
That exists. And did I know that? Of course not. So I went down a rabbit hole and found it, and off to the races, writing about it.
Did you have a deadline for finishing this?
No.
How long did it take you to write from start to finish?
Well, from seeing the boat to actually deciding it was going to to my readers was probably, I'd say, 3 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's not terribly long.
Yeah.
Because I've spoken with some other authors who it took me 12 years. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, good God.
Yeah.
How can somebody work for 12 years on the same thing? But 3 is manageable.
Yeah. To Kill a Mockingbird was something like that, 16 years or some ungodly number.
Exactly. I just want to touch base here. Oh, yeah, I want to talk about the chief, too, Charlie. Were you here during the era of Mike Chitwood?
Oh, yeah. I never knew him.
You never knew him?
No.
Because the police chief is such a big figure in the community, and Charlie is kind of a. Well, tell us about him. What's your take on Charlie? Because he's the interim chief, and he's trying to get the job, and
he's the interim chief, and he's he's bumped right up against the Peter principle. You work until you fail. You get promoted until you get to the point where you fail. And he may be at that point. He was a great lieutenant. He did the lieutenant thing well. He's a leader of men. But he is reaching failure because he's not a politician.
And he's dealing with a lot of politicians.
And he's dealing with politicians and way too much, really, with the vice president coming.
Which actually was kind of prescient on your part.
A little bit, wasn't it?
I was reading that saying, wow, vice president, how about that?
Yeah.
But he's, I was waiting to see if Charlie was going to emerge as more of a colorful figure in this book, but, a la Mike Chitwood, who never saw a microphone he could resist or a camera, but that was not so much Charlie's way.
That was not Charlie. Charlie was a great lieutenant, a great leader of men in the field, and however, not a great a political leader. He didn't really want to handle that stuff.
Yeah, it left me wondering if he would become chief or not. You know, it's still kind of
Up in the air.
Up in the air.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
So the end of the book, which just grabbed me by the throat, and probably everybody else too, because you know something's coming. When you get out onto ice cold in the middle of that hurricane, and everything is pitching and turning, and, you know, it's the thing that struck me was, number one, how many people were on the boat. Before, while they were all still alive, there were probably about 10, roughly. I would say
Both.
10.
I mean, there were
Both
the crew was 4,
and there were 4 police,
think.
and then there were
So
Silk and
yeah, so
Eileen.
that is about right.
Yeah.
10. Yeah.
And throughout this very tense, it sounds like it probably took place over not too long a time, a couple hours at the most, maybe, if that.
Yeah.
But everybody's moving, you know, and everybody's in a different place, and it matters, because where people go is you know, who's waiting. You wonder who's waiting for them. How do you, as a writer, when you're looking at that, this now the stage has been reduced to this yacht, big one, but still it's out in the ocean in the middle of a storm, and you've got all these people with different objectives. How do you write that as an author? Do you diagram it? Do you? How did you produce that final, half dozen chapters or so? I would say.
Right. That's about right.
Yeah.
I do diagram it. That's the answer. I have 5 drawings, because it's a 5-level boat, and therefore 5 levels of action. And the boat itself has to one level has to communicate with the other level, let alone having the actors occupy the space. So on one level, if there's a pool, then on the lower level there's the pool. You know, and so I have
with the observation windows.
With the observation window. Yeah. That Fyodor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so diagrams, architectural drawings.
Because I imagine it would be very easy to misplace someone accidentally, and then all of a sudden, wait a minute, I thought this person was here or there. You know?
And I had to, as I wrote, I had to go back and look at those drawings constantly.
And throughout that whole scene, again, much like downtown Portland, much like Munjoy Hill, as somebody who's sailed on Casco Bay a few times, have you spent time out there?
Yeah, a lot.
Obviously.
A lot, yeah.
Do you have a boat?
Right. Had.
Okay,
Don't have one right now. But
because when you started describing the swells in Hussey Sound, I think, oh yeah.
Yeah, he's been there.
I know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
On a good day.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
Let alone when there's a hurricane.
Right.
And junk of pork. And I remember when you first mentioned junk of pork, it was passing reference. I think the pilot was going to meet them if Keene could get the boat back there.
Yeah.
And you made a passing reference to it, and I thought to myself, people aren't going to know what the heck he's talking about.
Yeah.
What is junk of pork? And then you come back and explain it.
Yeah.
Was that was intentional on your part, because some of these things just need to be explained?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
People are
junk
gonna-
of pork.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
It's a fancifully named
Or
rock.
a rock. That's about it. There's not much to it.
No.
But when you tell people things, these little local references, it always has that effect where people they do a double take and say, "What is that?
Yeah.
What
right.
is he talking about?"
Yeah. Right.
But it's authentic.
But
and
it's
really works.
authentic. It lends authenticity to the narrative, and but therefore has to be explained.
Have you ever been out there in seas like that?
Not
30
like that.
That was
Nobody
30
has,
feet.
yeah.
Yeah, right. No,
Right.
But you've been out. You've been
But I
out
have been
on the
on
beyond the
swell-
islands.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've been on the swells post hurricane or post tropical storm anyway, and we get wicked swells between here and Kennebunkport, for example. You know, I've been there. I did that trip in post-tropical storm swells.
It's a
And it was
frightening
wicked.
experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Especially as you get out by, out of the channel, out by Portland Head, and start heading out into what is really open ocean.
Right.
That's where things get kind of dicey.
Right.
So you didn't, I had visions of you out there, notebook in hand,
Right.
trying to put yourself in that situation.
Right.
and,
Right.
Just because it was just so perilous. And the fact that Keene was able to get that boat in, it's just amazing that he didn't founder out there. Another audience member wanted to know if this is, and we've seen this with some other Maine writers, particularly with police and detective type stories, if this is the beginning of something. There's ample opportunity here for Keene, Hurley, Peterson. She stuck around.
She did. Yeah.
To continue in their exploits.
Yeah.
Could this be the beginning of a series?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I'm writing the second installment
Oh, great.
right now.
Excellent.
And I say installment. It uses the same characters. It's not an ongoing part. It's not ongoing with this same tableau, but it is ongoing using the same characters.
I hope Eileen comes back.
Got to have Eileen.
And Sully's, of course.
Oh yeah.
There's some. Well, that's good news because it's nice to have these kind of stories identified with Maine, which, boy, if I've learned one thing from this book club, it's what a fertile place Maine is for this kind of storytelling. And somebody asked earlier, could this have taken place anywhere else? Well, I guess the basic plot line could have. But what's it like to be a published novelist in Maine? It must be probably no place else you'd rather do it, huh?
Probably not. And part of the reason for that is our readers. Maine's must be the best read state in the country. The bookstores are very healthy, doing very well. Libraries, the library network in Maine is incredible. And so the reader, there's no better readership than in Maine.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to be here for that purpose.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the questioner was alluding to this, but the inspiration of the state is unparalleled. I mean, I find all kinds. I don't know if you remember in the book there was a scene where Keene was walking on the Eastern Prom collecting his thoughts.
Oh, I told you yesterday, I used to do the same thing.
Yeah, I did too. And the seagull and the three crows face off. Well, I saw that happen I think I was in Ellsworth maybe, and I pulled over to watch the scene. It was really interesting to me. I don't know. And I said to myself, I've got to get that in the book.
And the seagull gives up.
And the seagull gave up.
Yeah, that was the thing that struck me the most about that scene.
Yeah.
You were expecting a big fight. There was no fight.
No.
Seagull says, "Oh, eat the French fries. I don't care."
Yeah. That's why he wanted to keep his dress clean. I'm not going to get into it.
Well, speaking of Maine readers, there are two groups of people that several people expressed interest in, and this is kind of the question whenever you write about a real place in relatively real time, you get this, and that is, have you heard anything from anybody on the Hill about this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, it's been great. There's a Facebook group called Straight Outta Munjoy.
Yep.
And these guys are great. There's over 1,000 of them, and
they can't all fit into Sully's, right?
they can't fit into Sully's, so some of them go to the Munjoy Hill Tavern.
The tavern,
yeah,
right,
tavern.
Right,
But they've been great. They've been very supportive. We've had great give and take.
Did they critique it?
And I would love for one of them to be my reader for the next book. So
Just
I'm
to
putting
make
it
sure
out there.
it's ringing authentic and you're
Yeah,
getting the
yeah.
right reference. And the other group I was interested in was the police. How have your police friends reacted to this?
I don't have feedback yet from any of them. Most of them probably haven't had time to read it yet. So no, I don't have any feedback at this point.
Okay.
So but I'm sure I will.
You'll hear it.
Yeah, I'll hear it from them.
One way or the, you just don't want to be the next Leo.
Yeah, right.
You want to stay on the
Burn
good
my
side.
sources.
Yeah, exactly, because these guys, I mean, they are your sources now, you know. I used to worry about that early on in my career. And I guess you get over it after a while, but you're so focused on how people are going to react to what you wrote. Did that, when this being your first novel, and when it came out and it's out there, was that a hard time as you're waiting, kind of, to get any kind of reaction, some kind of feedback?
Yeah, it is really hard, but I was lucky because I got a reviewer immediately asked me to send the book so he could review it. And while I was waiting for him to review it, obviously I'm on pins and needles. And I also was on pins and needles thinking he was a charlatan, just wanted the book for free, but not really. But he had a great review of it.
Oh, good. Okay.
So that was probably the most heart-stopping.
Yeah, a big weight lifted.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you are, if you're exposing yourself any way you look at it when you write anything, and you put it out there for people to read, and they're either going to love it or they're not going to love it.
Yeah.
And it's a vulnerable moment. For you. It really is. To wait and see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now we had talked about maybe you sharing an excerpt from the book with us. Would you like to do that?
I really would.
Okay, great. This, I believe, is about our favorite character.
It's about it's the introduction.
Ah, well, no better time to meet Eileen than right now.
In the present.
I will admit she was my favorite too.
She's fun. So, where should I look? This way? This is the introduction to Eileen. I have edited a tiny bit for this reading. The office was a small room behind the kitchen that was the beating heart of Sully's Tap, hot as freaking Hades. Eileen Mack opened Twitter on her phone. She tapped in job interviews, hoping to find advice. All she got was one successful interviewee after another crowing about their brilliance, but no guidance, no tips, no tutorial on technique. In the column to the right, she touched on job seekers and was plunged further into the unhelpful world of others' successes. She rolled her eyes as she scrolled lower and lower to the purgatorial depths of useless suggestions from the Twitter world. The framed victualer's license on a wall in the office of Sully's Tap appeared in good order, she guessed. Up to date, anyway. Eileen glanced back at the phone. Somehow the Twitter subject matter had morphed into a tweet about psychokinesis. If nothing else, she liked the word. The tweeter was named Babylon Psycho, which made the whole thing worth coming back to. A further glance around the office revealed a laptop, open on a small desk with some kind of business software, all green and tan lines, with numbers and letters and sprayed across them. It appeared Mr. Sullivan paid attention to business, a good trait in a prospective employer. "Sorry to hold you up," Gary Sullivan, owner of Sully's Tap, said as he moved through the door. If Eileen was honest, the sudden entrance of the owner spooked her a little. He was tall and skinny. The mustache made him look a little pervy, a little child molestery. 3 amigos just showed up. Got to keep them happy. 3 of my most loyal customers. He held her application in his hand. The bar owner looked at the application for a while and in the end said, "Which Mac is your dad?" Eileen's hand went to her cotton candy pink hair and moved a swatch of it behind her ear. All by itself, the hand's owner wasn't aware of the movement because the question, the very first question of the interview, presented a minefield to navigate. She wanted to tell Mike, Michaela's dad, her uncle, or make up a name, but she couldn't do it. She couldn't disown her father. She'd been sure about renouncing Satan upon her confirmation. That was a no-brainer. But abandoning her dad, though there seemed a potential upside to the renunciation, it was just wrong. "Francis," she said with a sigh of resignation. She could only hope the answer didn't disqualify her out of hand. "How is Franny?" Sullivan asked. "You mean," she thought, "since you banned him from the establishment for being drunk, disorderly, and exceptionally unappealing? He's okay, I guess." Mr. Sullivan's smile was meant to be comforting, but still had a little perviness to it. "Tell me about yourself. How old are you?" "Says here." She clasped her slick hands in her lap. 23, she lied, just the way she'd practiced. "I didn't realize Franny had a daughter so old," Mr. Sullivan said. "Yup," she said, 23. "Huh," he said.
Oh, that's great.
That's Eileen.
She has arrived.
Yeah.
Before we end, could we go to the boat one more time when she is, what is it, what do you call it when she's moving? She can make things.
Psychokinesis, psychokinetic energy,
right.
That kind of stuff.
And talk to me about that scene where the Peterson, the Coast Guard is trying to lift Detective Peterson up. Every time she gets above the bulkhead, the litter starts to spin.
Right.
Which is a problem. I've
Yes.
seen that happen,
Yes.
and it's horrifying.
Yes. It is horrifying. I've seen it too.
You know, there's an injured person
Yeah.
up there.
Yeah.
And she channels all of that energy, and it works.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there was some talk later in the book about how they said, "Oh, that was the eye of the hurricane," which was, however, disproven by the fact that the eye of the hurricane had passed 40 miles to the south, and this moment of calm that enabled them to get Peterson onto the chopper could not be explained meteorologically, or at least it wasn't the eye of the hurricane. So we are left to believe, or at least I was, that for once in her life, Eileen's mental powers changed nature.
Mm-hmm.
And is that what you wanted me to believe?
Yes,
Or
it
do you want me to
is.
think that there's some logical explanation, which is my analytical mind saying, wait a minute. You know.
Well, and my analytical mind said the same, that there should be. I mean, if you want to, you can explain it away. If you really want to, go ahead. Was it really Eileen finally making the chaos of her life come into order, whether psychokinetically or not? You can believe that too.
Yeah.
That was that is Eileen's real modus operandi. She grew up in chaos.
Right.
You know, her father's an alcoholic. The mother was half in, half out of her life, fully out by the time of the story narrative, and so she's experienced nothing but chaos. And it dawns on her, Psycho Babylon, or whatever the guy's name was, convinces her that she can exercise something in her brain to bring some order to her life.
Mm-hmm.
And she fails, as we know, behind the bar.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the story, she's trying and she's trying and it just doesn't come to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
But finally, believe what you will, but her hair wasn't flapping around
Right.
like everybody else's.
And she had a moment with Keen there
Yeah.
too, where they
Yeah.
locked eyes, if I recall.
Yeah.
Right? Almost like he was
brought into
it.
and he was.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it wasn't just one person having an isolated experience. It was something that was shared between these two individuals, which lent it some credence.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad
Yeah.
you say that. And they have been the two that have been sort of at loggerheads,
Right.
sort of lightly,
Yeah.
but nonetheless, they have bumped noses all throughout the book.
So is Eileen going to be Keen's babysitter? At
Perhaps.
the end of the book, Melania?
Milena.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I love that there's this flurry of thought in the final paragraph where she's been wanting to tell him that they're about to become parents, and of course circumstances prevent it. And his cop mind is working overtime.
Right.
And all of a sudden, at the very last second, he figures it out.
Right.
And which again strikes me as a perfect launch point, to a sequel. It really does.
That was somewhat designed, I may say.
Well, that's good, because you want to have that desire to keep going, which anybody who reads this book is going to say. I got to the end, and it's always my barometer of a good book is say, oh, does it really have to end now?
Well, I'm glad. Thank you for saying that.
You want it to keep going, so
Yeah.
that's why I was thrilled to hear that you're working on
Yeah.
something.
Thank you for
related.
saying that.
Oh,
That
well.
feels really good.
Well, it was it was really fun to read, and it's been great talking to you too
Yeah,
about
great
it.
talking with you.
We'll be probably doing this again sometime.
I certainly hope so. This was a blast.
Who knows? The book is Hunger Hill. We hope you've all read it. If you haven't, please do, because this is, as summer reads go, I can't think of a better one, especially if you're right here in Greater Portland. You'll feel like you're right at home. Phil, thank you.
You're
We
welcome.
much appreciate you
Thank you
joining
very
us
much,
tonight.
Bill. Yeah.
And thank all of you here live, and thank all of you out there on the stream for joining us. Our next book club event is going to be on September 25th, when we sit down with Amanda Peters, who is the author of Berry Pickers. So you can pick that up right now, and you have about a month to read it. Thanks once again to Bull Moose for hosting us tonight and for their sponsorship of our series, and again to Coffee by Design for their sponsorship as well. Without you folks, we wouldn't be able to do this. That's it for tonight. We will see you in September. Have a great end of summer, and thanks for joining us.